Think about the last time you told yourself just one. One chip. One cookie. One piece of chocolate. You meant it. You had every intention of stopping. And then you didn't. Now think about the most famous moment of eating in human history. A woman stands in a garden. She's been told not to eat the fruit from one specific tree. She eats it anyway. We've spent thousands of years calling that a moral failure, a lack of willpower, the original sin. Here's what's strange. Modern neuroscience has a completely different name for what happened to Eve in that garden, and it has nothing to do with morality. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly what fruit Eve most likely ate, and it's not what you think. You'll see why the serpent's pitch maps almost perfectly to modern food marketing, and you'll understand why the shame Eve felt after eating is the same cycle that drives every food addiction today. That last part is the piece most people have never connected, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's start with the fruit itself, because the apple is almost certainly wrong. Genesis 3:6 is the key verse. It says, Eve saw that the tree was good for food, pleasing to the eye, and desirable for gaining wisdom. No mention of an apple anywhere. The Hebrew word is just peri, fruit, generic. The apple association came much later. Medieval European art, 9th and 10th century. Latin played a role. The word malum means both evil and apple. When scholars translated the Hebrew text into Latin, the double meaning got embedded. Artists ran with it. The apple became canonical. But it was never in the text. So what was it? Most biblical scholars now favor the fig, and the evidence is right there in the next verse. The moment Adam and Eve realize they've eaten, the very next thing they do is reach for fig leaves. Not any leaves, fig leaves specifically. They were standing next to the tree they just ate from. That's why they grabbed those particular leaves. Figs are one of the most ancient cultivated foods in the Middle East. Archaeological evidence of fig cultivation goes back 11,400 years, older than wheat, older than barley, older than the earliest grain agriculture we've identified. And here's what matters nutritionally. A single fresh fig contains more immediately available sugar than almost any other wild fruit in that region. If you were designing a fruit specifically to be irresistible to a brain calibrated for scarcity, you would design a fig. Other candidates include the pomegranate, rich in Jewish tradition, linked to knowledge and fertility. The grape appears in early Mesopotamian agricultural records. Some scholars have even proposed wheat, the food that reorganized human civilization around itself. What every serious candidate shares, fig, pomegranate, grape, wheat, is that they are hyper-palatable, rich in natural sugars, visually striking, complex in flavor. Exactly the category of food that a brain shaped by millions of years of scarcity finds impossible to walk away from. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because knowing what the fruit probably was leads directly to understanding how it was sold. I want you to read the serpent's argument in Genesis 3 as if you've never heard it before. It is, functionally, the most effective piece of food marketing ever written. 3 moves in exact order. Step 1. Undermine the restriction. Did God really say you must not eat from any tree? The serpent doesn't open with, "Eat this." It opens by making the rule seem unreasonable. Before the product is pitched, the prohibition is already in question. Step 2. Reframe the consequence. You will not surely die. The downside isn't as bad as they told you. Every processed food ad since 1950 has operated on exactly this logic. the cost is minimized. You won't die from one. Step 3. Promise transformation. You will be like God, knowing good and evil. You'll be smarter, better, different after eating this. Modern equivalent? This is the food high performers eat. The consumption becomes identity. Psychologists have a name for what those 3 moves engineered in Eve's brain. It's called psychological reactance. When a behavior is restricted, desire for that behavior doesn't stay neutral. It increases. Measurably, consistently. A 2007 study at the University of Texas found that telling people they couldn't have a specific food made them rate it as significantly more desirable, even when they'd shown no prior preference for it. The restriction manufactured the craving. The forbidden tree didn't have to be special, it just had to be forbidden. And that's the moment I want you to picture. Eve standing at that tree, not eating it, just standing there. Because this is where the biology becomes precise. The human reward system operates on anticipation, not satisfaction. When you see something desirable, food that appears high in sugar or fat, your brain releases dopamine not at the moment of eating, but before it. The spike happens at the sight, at the smell, at the thought. The actual experience of eating often delivers less pleasure than the anticipation promised. You felt this. The cookie is never quite as good as the moment before you eat it. Dr. Kent Berridge at the University of Michigan has spent 3 decades separating what he calls wanting from liking. Your brain has fundamentally different systems for these 2 experiences. The wanting system, dopaminergic, unconscious, automatic, can run at full intensity independent of whether you actually enjoy the outcome. It's why you reach for the chips even when you know you'll feel bad afterward. You're not responding to liking, you're responding to wanting. Eve was standing at the only tree in the entire garden she had been told not to touch. In her visual field. Every moment she spent not eating it, her wanting system was running at full throttle. And look at what Genesis 3:6 actually says she experienced. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. 3 distinct sensory drivers, all 3 firing simultaneously. Visual appeal, anticipated taste, cognitive desire, the promise of a reward beyond nutrition. Modern food scientists call this the bliss point, the precise combination of signals that maximizes consumption drive. Eve's account of the fruit is a clinical description of a bliss point food. A 2012 study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition by Dr. David Ludwig and colleagues at Harvard Medical School found that high glycemic foods, the exact category that figs and pomegranates fall into, activate the nucleus accumbens, the same brain region associated with addictive drug responses. The brain doesn't meaningfully distinguish between a highly palatable food and an addictive substance at the level of the reward pathway. The mechanism is the same. The serpent didn't invent food addiction. It just described a fruit that happened to be perfectly engineered for it. And then they ate. Genesis 3:7. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. What happened next is what modern psychiatry calls entirely predictable. After the dopamine crash, and there is always a crash, the prefrontal cortex reasserts itself. Clarity returns. You see what just happened. And if you've been told that what you did was wrong, shame arrives. Dr. Brené Brown's research at the University of Houston, supported by more than a decade of data, found a consistent and clinically documented relationship between shame and addictive behavior. Shame does not reduce the behavior, It accelerates the cycle. Shame leads to avoidance, which leads to restriction, which intensifies craving, which leads to another episode, which generates more shame. Eve's immediate response to shame was to cover herself and hide. That is the exact structure of food shame right now. Eat something labeled bad, feel acute guilt, restrict more aggressively, increase craving through that restriction, eat again, feel worse shame than before. The restriction that was supposed to prevent the problem is the thing that keeps the cycle running. Adam's response is equally revealing. When asked what happened, he says, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it." The shame is so acute, he can't hold it. He deflects immediately, assigns blame outward rather than process what occurred. We still do this. I was stressed. It was a cheat day. I'd already eaten badly, so it didn't matter. All deflection. All Adam. Now here is the part most biblical commentary and most nutrition advice get completely wrong. The tree wasn't poisonous. The fruit wasn't inherently evil. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil wasn't a trap, it was a boundary. And the problem wasn't the fruit. The problem was the relationship with the restriction. A 2011 meta-analysis in Psychological Bulletin by Janet Tomiyama at UCLA, reviewing 31 long-term dietary restriction studies, found that restriction reliably increases cortisol, reliably increases craving intensity, and produces worse long-term outcomes than non-restrictive approaches. Every time. The garden had an entire ecosystem of food available. Every seed-bearing plant, every tree with fruit, unlimited access. One exception. And that one exception became the only food that mattered to the brain placed in that garden. Studies published in the journal Appetite in 2013 found that individuals who followed rigid good food/bad food classifications reported significantly higher rates of binge eating than those who used flexible approaches with no forbidden categories. Not weak will, not moral failure. A completely predictable neurological response to restriction. If you're finding this as interesting as I am, hit subscribe. Every week we go deep into what ancient habits and biblical history can actually teach us about how to live and eat today. 3 things, simple ones. First, identify what you've labeled forbidden. Whatever you've told yourself you cannot have, that label is generating craving, not controlling it. You're not protecting yourself from the tree. You're standing in front of it every day with your wanting system running at capacity. Second, eat the fig. What Eve ate probably wasn't evil. It was almost certainly a fig, a piece of fruit with a high sugar content that a brain built for scarcity found overwhelming in that particular context of restriction and anticipation. Context matters more than the food itself. There are no forbidden fruits. There are just foods in context. Third, when the shame cycle starts, and you'll recognize it now, name it for what it is, a neurological pattern, not a character flaw, not evidence that something is wrong with you. A predictable cascade in a brain that has been shaped by restriction. Eve didn't fall because she was weak. She fell because she was human. Standing in front of a food her brain had been primed to want after a pitch designed to exploit every mechanism her reward system possessed. In a world that now employs entire departments of food scientists doing exactly the same thing, engineering the bliss point, reframing consequences, selling transformation through consumption. What happened in that garden isn't ancient history. It's Tuesday. Maybe that says something about what we're still eating. Or maybe it says something about how little has changed.